I want to share with you the book that is Vermis III and show you all the ways that it recaptures the brilliance of the first Vermis book, but with even more relentlessly fascinating imagery. That's going to be the majority of the video, but since this is a tabletop RPG channel, I do want to share with you some of the ways to actually use Vermis III in an RPG. Even though this book is not a functional, playable role-playing game, it's kind of a brilliant resource for game masters running any kind of grimdark or dark fantasy at their table. I do want to emphasize that this is not a functional guide for any kind of game, almost hilariously so. If it were a game, it might in fact be the worst RPG ever made in terms of the coherence and play experience. Well, you can be the judge of that. Now let's get started. The first spread here details 4 undead brothers. They're just skeletons at this point. They sort of give you a quest to mend that which has been broken. One of them is carrying a ring that we never hear about again. Then they sort of disappear on you, and that's that. On to the next little vignette. I point that out because all Vermis books sort of do this. They spend 1 to 3 pages on a scene, and then it's on to the next idea that Plastiboo has, which is fine. It's not a real strategy guide. Its real function is to entertain and inspire. There are 2 kinds of souls or spirits: rooted spirits and flowing spirits. The actual difference written in the descriptions is pretty ambiguous. Okay, now we're getting into some game-like elements here. Here you will pick one of 3 arcane relics for your journey. These are each actually pretty interesting magic items. The King's Ring allows you to change your face, but you have to stare at it for an hour in the darkness, and you can only change into faces of people who have previously worn the ring. The Blue Star Necklace shines the proper path for its wearer. Great way for a GM to railroad players. Then there's the Singular Bone, a vertebrate that basically enhances the bearer's karma for better or worse. Out of the 3, obviously the King's Ring has the most emergent storytelling potential.
Beware the states that can damage the flesh. Paralysis, infestation, dread, bewitchment, nausea. Actually, they send me a nausea patch every time you order a book from Hollow Press. They send you a random patch. I got nausea, poison, bedazzlement, weakness, wrath, bleeding, punishment, insanity.
There are an impressive 15 statted enemies, first introduced in brief like this, then in greater detail page by page. This is one of the reasons I think this book really returned to form after getting a little lost in the second volume. Just like Vermis 1, you get the description and the full body and close-up of the head, 2 unique items of interest, and core stats. This is hardcore strategy guide motif stuff right here. The Pond Knight walks around with a dish-like helmet full of pond water, and they can sense movement around them using the water. Their stone shield constantly weeps water, and they have a carved candle-looking thing that can calm a body of water. Flesh eaters are super creepy and inherently more dangerous. Sadistic, cannibalistic subhumans whose tongues are trapped in a brass sheath. Really low stats though, so if you're trying to put this into an RPG at your table, they'd be easy to defeat. Sons of Thunder can invoke violent thunderstorms, although sometimes it takes days of them standing completely still, which is a really silly scene if you think about it. But the not so silly part is that they can capture, store, and control lightning with their copper robes and giant staff. So if you don't catch them before the storm comes, you might have a boss level fight on your hands. Blackbone walkers are sort of Ronin-like wanderers with spears that light up when you hit them against stone or metal, and sacks of black powder that allow you to blend in perfectly with shadows. You have to rub the powder all over your body though, which is kind of messy, and I'd say that each sack probably only has 1 or 2 uses out of it before you run out. Wax warlocks are essentially archmages who have access to an unlimited number of spells thanks to their memories being stored in the wax that they wear on their heads. These are another boss level fight if you ask me. You might think that you can just knock that wax contraption off the top of their head and make them forget all their spells, but think about it. They know all the spells, so surely one of them is going to be a protection spell to prevent getting their wax knocked off. Not much to say about tortured beasts. If you're familiar with werewolves, then you'll understand the contours of this creature. But this is a good place to point out that if you're a GM mining this book for ideas, you're often going to be filling in a lot of blanks. In this case, the biggest questions that come to mind are, what triggers the transformation into beast? How long does the beast phase last? Is there a lasting cure? The Wood Witch is a piece of intriguing world building. It's said that they are not true witches, nor are they true followers of Murgo, one of the gods mentioned in the first book. The Wood Witch wears a mask that makes them look like a witch so they can sneak into real witch gatherings, and they carry around a little magical root that screams when you bite it and will eventually grow into the likeness of a newborn baby. These baby-looking roots are used by witches to disguise themselves as mothers or caretakers in order to get close to their victims to kill and devour them. In perfect Vermis fashion, we don't actually know much about Murgo or real witches. We just know that they're really horrible cannibals and that there are people who infiltrate their ranks. It's just enough to possibly be fascinated or inspired. Green Sun Swordsmen are another world-building starter. They are actually goblins who have overcome their naturally cowardly nature and become valiant knights. It says, after their last battle, these valiant warriors were proud to become the Aegis of the new kingdom. We don't know what or when that last battle was, nor what this new kingdom is, but that one sentence confers so much story. Importantly, they each carry a little green lead amulet or charm that retains their better nature. If they renounce the power of the charm, they'll slip back into their more primitive goblin state. The choirman is a little lacking in evocative description. They're holy men of the god Dorvis and will reluctantly sing an attack song or smack enemies with their censer. Dorvis is another god cited in the first Vermis book. It might be the grossest looking god out of them all, actually. The Testament Knight confused me a little bit. Instead of a written description, there's a sort of needy prayer, and one of the items is a big slab of stone containing a petrified body. Make of that what you will. There's also a vial of depetrification potion that's actually just a deadly poison. Spoiler alert. Foul souls are subterranean wanderers who were once prisoners but now just sort of undead ghouls. They clink around in shackles and each carry a stinky little doll that gives them comfort but will make you sick if you get near it. The Bell Mage is a very specialized wizard that can project illusions into people's heads in order to make them experience incredible stories, sounds, or tastes. They have a series of masks that rotate on a neck brace, and each mask empowers them to control a different sense. I think at first blush, the Bell Mage might seem like a benign traveling storyteller type, but imagine one as an agent of an evil lord or a queen or something, sent into cities and the countryside to spread false propaganda. Surely such a Bell Mage would be worthy of slaughter. Marionettists are particularly fascinating to me. They magically control a puppet that can become quite deft at fighting, stealing, or even making love. The best and most dangerous Marionettists also excel at illusion magic, so they can disguise their puppets as living humans. Each puppet contains a mocking heart, which is described as the first step towards perpetual pseudo-life. This insinuates that the puppet could come into its own almost as a living creature. I think there are a lot of storytelling possibilities here if you think about it. Perhaps the puppet achieves sentience and becomes a better creature than its master. Or perhaps the marionettist reforms at some point, but its now living puppet returns and demands to do more evil. The prisoner is more of a philosophical quandary than anything. These folks walk around inside of a gibbet thinking that they are free in the open world while everything outside of the bars is enclosed in a cage. Is this creature merely a solipsist, or are they just experiencing a major case of sour grapes? I don't know, but with these stats you could just walk up and kick it over. Finally, there's the Plague Missionary, a sort of disease spreader who carries around a bag of infected maggots and a large clay urn. The urn contains the plague with a capital P. It's said that all of these missionaries come from one town called Greeman, which exists in order to incubate sickness and spread it across the realm. Okay, this is where the game's walkthrough actually starts. Your character wakes up in some shallow water. It's very hazy and misty all around. You don't quite recognize your own hands. There's a thorny thicket all along the coast you're standing on. You trudge along in the water. Oh, by the way, you're wearing full plate and you have a sword. Oh, but also there's another sword in the water. It's all crusty and gross, but it's actually a pretty good sword. Oh, and this is the first combat encounter here. It's a gaunt, cloaked woman sitting atop a headless horse that is steaming hot. The blood dripping from the neck wound sizzles when it hits the water. The horse rears up menacingly. You have a shield now, by the way. The lady has an axe and keeps charging at you. The book advises you to keep evading, and really the only way to win the encounter is to attack the horse itself. After a while of fighting, you can sort of stumble upon this thorny entrance into a cove that the lady can't follow you through. The path actually goes down into the ground with some stairs leading into a murky cave where there's this huge stone face with a fountain for a mouth. If you keep going, you run into a really tall, thin statue of a cloaked man. In its hand is an apple. The apple itself is like a health indicator while you're in this region. You can sort of look at the apple and it will tell you your health status. You enter into this large space full of more thorns and brambles. There are whispers and writhing carnivorous plants. You're still underneath the beach where you woke up, but this is technically a new area called the Defiled Sanctuary. There are 12 enemy types listed for this area, but we're not going to get any stats or anything for them. You'll just have to use your imagination. I really want to know what the witness does. You get to a huge pit in the floor that stinks to high heaven, and beyond it are 2 archways. You walk into this chamber that has a deep pit and a walkway in the center that leads to a pedestal with a crystal orb and a long sword behind the orb. The orb starts twinkling in a bunch of different colors and begins to bewitch you. Then a cloaked figure appears behind the orb and sort of holds the sword. The orb itself starts showing you visions of acts of cruelty and weakness, and you suspect that it's you in those visions. You have a choice. If you keep watching the orb, oh, by the way, that sword is right at your neck now. If you keep watching the orb, the illusion collapses and the sword falls and you're safe. If you turn away from the orb though, the cloaked figure slashes you with the sword. If you can dodge or survive that attack and then smash the orb, or I guess light the mantle on fire, apparently, the whole setup just goes away. You continue on through snaking passages. It was a once holy place, but now the ceilings have caved in and there are lots of thorns everywhere. Some of that vicious flora that was listed earlier shows up here. The most effective way to kill one of these plants is to chop it at the base. They're sort of impervious to bolts and arrows, although I'm not sure how or where you would have picked up a crossbow or bow anyway. Moving on, there are some stationary vicious flora that will snap at you if you brush them or step on their roots. Then you get to the waving hand. As long as you're not carrying a light source, this pale spectral hand will wave at you. It won't talk or anything, it'll just sort of wave at you. You have to wave back. And if you solve that puzzle, then it will point you in the right direction and then disappear, and then you can move on. You then walk into a room where the floor is covered in water. In one corner is this giant skeleton slumped over. Inside the skeleton are a bunch of regular sized human bones. The book warns you not to remove any of the smaller skeletons or bones, but I don't know what happens if you do. Okay, here's a pretty cool encounter. You walk into a room and the walls and floor and ceiling are covered in roots, some of which form a huge humanoid figure. Although it's not shown in the illustration, there's a man stuck in the roots on the wall, wearing gem-encrusted armor, and then the root figure itself comes alive, swinging at you. If you don't keep moving, it will grasp you, and it says here that that means certain death, but that's a little too harsh. I think I'd soften it a bit and just have the grasp do damage and maybe confer a grappling condition or something like that. Anyway, if you can manage to somehow destroy the armored figure stuck on the wall, the whole thing dies and you get a magical bramble short sword. When you beat the root giant, a big hole in the wall opens up and you can bounce on out of the sanctuary. Before you go, don't forget to pry the gems off of that armor of the guy on the wall. This place isn't going to loot itself.
Vermis.
You fall asleep next to your campfire, but then wake up in a sort of barren, misty desert. A skeleton starts floating towards you and says some omen-y prophecy stuff. Then bam, you actually wake up. That skeleton was just a dream, but you don't have your voice anymore. That skeleton actually stole your voice. Game-wise, you can't perform prayers, chants, or enchantments. If you somehow get the idea to cut out your tongue and keep it in a witch urn, then you can cast magic again, but you have to treat the tongue with medicinal herbs every day to keep it from rotting. You'll also want to keep some parchment and ink on hand at all times so you can write messages to communicate with NPCs, but it's noted that most of them are illiterate, so you're actually kind of screwed. After 3 days of traveling north, you're now in a frozen winter forest. It's actually very peaceful and beautiful. You're officially in a new area called the Withered Woods. There are 12 possible enemies to encounter in this area, but again, no stats or anything, just these pictures. If you're a fan of Vermis like me, these dithered images never get old. It's the result of decades of playing those crappy, classic old computer games that has burned it into my brain that this is legitimately good looking stuff. Here's a pretty mild encounter. You come upon a stone pillar in the forest that has 4 faces on it. As you approach, it slowly starts to rise out of the ground, and it turns out it's a gigantic stone creature shaped more or less like a turtle. It walks up to you and you have a choice. Either just let it stare at you, at which point your face will appear in stone on its body somewhere, or you attack it and that initiates a battle in which it attacks you pretty much in slow motion and you can walk away. So the next thing is you get to a clump of burned out trees and you see a little pair of glowing eyes beneath in the hollow. A little voice calls out and it's inviting you to come lie down in its bed down there. It's an ugly little imp that's trying to bewitch you. There's actually an icon right there for bewitchment, but ironically, you actually have more choices here than normal. You can either turn away, in which case the imp curses you with words, or approach the imp, in which case it will try to grab you and break your bones and eat you. I don't know if it's strong enough to do that actually. In any case, your third option is to attack it, which is something you'd probably do anyway if it tried to grab you. If you attack it, it immediately burrows itself into the ground and out of sight, and then you keep walking, it's getting dark. You get to a tranquil pond where you can quench your thirst. Then across the waters, you spot a dark figure standing there. As you get a better look, it turns out the figure is a bloated old lady with no clothes on and teeth rotted black. It's a mud witch. As she puts a foot into the pond, the true nature of the water is revealed. It's a stinky, rotten bog. Then boom, she's right behind you, trying to strangle you and force a little pearly pebble into your mouth. She has several powers. One is projectile vomit of some black sludge. She can shoot that several feet. Another is that she can turn the forest against you, making the roots and branches sort of attack you and try to steal your gear. Her third notable power is that she can appear to be a young woman, although she should have maybe led with that one. This is actually a pretty difficult fight because the Mud Witch can only truly be defeated by having her tongue cut out, and she teleports, as we saw earlier. And if she somehow manages to get that little pebble into your mouth, it's pretty much game over. You turn into a so-called witch finger, a mindless thrall who only does her bidding. You then come upon a perfectly circular clearing in the forest where nothing inside of it grows. In the center of the clearing is a completely dark statue, even though it's in the middle of the day. There's a great description of it in the book. Up close, the statue looks coarse and sharp and dark beyond all understanding, as if it had been born out of the fiery womb of the world back when time was still young. There's an inscription on the statue that is equally great. Share our pain, share our love. Here lies the living remains of Seto Zar, born as a man, buried as a beast. There is no encounter here. This is it. It's just a really creepy statue that's loaded with interesting backstory. Peak Vermis right here. You then get to 3 additional enemies for the Withering Wood. The Harpy is a territorial creature that likes shiny things. They'll either swoop down and try to snatch something shiny of yours, or hide in some bushes pretending to be a lady and then slashing at you with their talons if you get too close. Pale Watchers are sort of mindless creatures that wander the forest eating the bark off of trees. The only actual danger they pose is if you accidentally get too close to one. If they feel threatened, they'll try to bash you with their head. Possessed trees are controlled by the souls of people who died while sleeping in them. Trees possessed by evil souls will try to devour humans in the attempt to somehow regain their humanity. You then come upon a meadow, and there's this big patch of lilies. Sitting in the flowers is a person whose body is all shriveled up, but whose face is still young. He's holding up a lily and says some stuff to you about lilies and the fleeting nature of mortality. Then he dies. If for some reason you try to attack him, he will try to reach out and touch you. If he does manage to touch you, you're instantly teleported to a far off place that you've never seen before, but there's no elaboration on that. Eventually you come upon a cabin. A farmer comes out and asks you, who do you serve? The only right answer is if you say one of the many names of the god Dorvis. If you do, he lets you in for the night, and he's got a family and everything. Then we get to this spread on Dorvis. It's neat to have this information, and you get the different names for Dorvis down below. It's very whimsical to put this information here, but actually it makes sense if this is a strategy guide. This is sort of exactly where you want the names of Dorvis, so you can use one on the farmer. You sit down for supper. It's an extremely normal supper that you would expect with a farmer family. Nothing weird, except when everyone goes to bed, the farmer dad levels with you and says he's only giving you hospitality because of his religion, but the fact that you carry weapons means you're a person of violence and you need to leave in the morning. You actually get a pretty good night's sleep in front of a fire and everything. But you wake up in the middle of the woods, huddled in the hollow of a burned out tree and covered in dry leaves. If you go back to the farmhouse, you find that there's been a grisly massacre of the whole family, and evidence would suggest that their baby has been stolen. It's interesting that whatever creature or monster or villain came in and killed this family also bothered to drag you all the way out into the woods and tuck you into a tree with leaves and everything. Unless you're like schizophrenic and it was you who did the bad stuff. Once it's nighttime again, you can potentially run into a number of nocturnal creatures that we haven't seen before. The Hellbird is a carrion eater that doesn't attack humans, but its screech will attract other night monsters. The chanting figure walks around muttering to himself and is surrounded by an aura of murky darkness. It could give you the insanity condition. The lurking fiend only shows its face in the dirt and will try to attract you with a sweet smell. If you get too close, its sticky tongue will lash out and grab you and drag you into its burrows. I'm not clear on what happens after that. The lost soul is a restless ghost that wanders around carrying a light source. It could give you the dread condition. And tongue cutters are these huge insects that scare off predators by showing a face on their raised abdomens. They have a venomous sting that might give you the poison condition. You eventually come upon an inn that is situated in the middle of the woods. It's going off in there. People are laughing, drinking, lots of merrymaking. A barmaid leans out the window and beckons you inside. There's this whole cast of NPCs inside. A lady serving drinks, a creepy smiling guy peeling potatoes in the corner who doesn't even notice when he cuts his finger, one guy shaking his head sternly at everyone else, two guys singing a sailor shanty that doesn't make any sense, a despondent young woman staring into nothing, one guy passed out, one really loud guy who won't stop laughing, and one old lady standing in the middle of the room who nobody seems to notice. Nothing really happens with those creepy people that night. You just go upstairs and go to bed without any issues, and you have a dream about seeing a silver ring at the bottom of a tiny pool of water in the forest. But when you reach for it, the water crystallizes and you can't get the ring. It's kind of a perfect metaphor for Vermis, actually. When you wake up and go downstairs, it's a total massacre. The room is completely trashed and a sickly mold covers every surface. Instead of people, there are 8 crudely made puppets scattered on the floor and sitting in chairs. And their faces crudely resemble the people who you saw from the night before. Oh, and you lose all of your items except for your clothes and weapons. You travel east for a week, making it out of the withered woods into the burned out remnants of a once impregnable citadel towering over a town. You have reached the Scorched City, home of the punished. This right here could easily be the cover, creator name, and album title for a wicked dungeon synth vinyl, by the way. The city was burned up long ago. There are these big pulsing tumor things all over the place called black clots, and if you even barely touch one, it will explode with boiling black oil and confer the punishment condition. And speaking of punishment, this city was ravaged by this punishment some time ago. Stage 1 is burning rashes all over your body. Stage 2, which happens within hours, will actually burn your skin and only magic can heal it. Stage 3 is a permanent sensation of burning all over your body. And stage 4 is you're all burned up to the bone and might come back as something undead. As you continue walking through the streets, things are pretty bad here. One bandaged figure comes up to you trying to sell some loot, but you can feel the heat coming from the bag of loot itself. He's giving you the hard sell and trying to figure out if you have anything of value. Then he drops to the ground and spills the loot all over the street. Another bandaged figure comes hobbling out and yelling at you about leaving them alone. This one says that if you want riches, you should go to the Citadel, and also mentions that the city will continue to bear the sins of one man, whatever that means. After a minute, a bunch of townsfolk come hobbling out, throwing stones at you and telling you to go away. Naturally, you start making your way to the Citadel. On your way up there, you run into an old man with a ton of books strapped to his back. He's mumbling about the value of knowledge. He actually has some powerful magics, apparently, but won't use any of them on you unless you attack him. I'm not sure why you would attack him, though. Penitents of the Flame are those undead that I mentioned a minute ago. These creatures roam the inner city and will attack you and try to give you the punishment. Also, dogs and other animals have gotten in on this. You make your way to the market square, where a diseased, broke-down old wyvern has made a nest in a market cart. The whole square is in ruins, and the wyvern is surrounded by dead adventurers in melted armor. Except you do spot a few pieces of gear that remain intact because they're magic items. If you risk sneaking around the creature and dodging its fiery breath weapon attacks, you might be able to score some of this sweet gear. The first is a helmet that slightly cools off your head. The second is a gauntlet that can grasp things with heightened strength. The third is a short sword that doesn't reflect any light. And the fourth is an ultralight poisoned morning star. I think this morning star might actually poison you if you grab it, I'm not sure. You make your way to the Sunken Citadel, where everything is all twisted and the stone is melted into strange shapes. It's actually still hot, and you come upon a stone golem that sort of activates and says, "Halt where thou stand. Death shall come swift to those who intrude into Mansin Stronghold." There are 12 enemies in this Sunken Citadel area. We'll run into a few of them here in a minute. Searing slugs is a great creature design. They're all over the Citadel and tend to hang out in tight corridors. They can even cling to ceilings and drop down on your head. They spew boiling hot slime out of their mouths, and the slime is extremely slippery and stays hot for several minutes. You can counteract the slugs with salt or cold water if you happen to somehow have cold water with you here. The walls of the Citadel have swollen to the point that you have to crawl in places to get around, and you'll even run into dead ends after a bit of crawling, which is a claustrophobic's worst nightmare. Oh, there's this statue whose hands will provide an infinite amount of cold water, which is where you'll get your cold water for the slugs. And there are molten pillars of lava everywhere. This is honestly just a really good thematic dungeon. You reach another fountain of sorts. This one contains a feeble stream of water, and all of a sudden, 2 giant whetstone golems come charging at you out of the darkness. They're so heavy that they're cracking the flagstones underfoot and falling over. They also shoot jets of boiling water out of an unspecified orifice. After that's over, you come upon a lady knight who is in pretty bad shape. If you're able to give her enough fresh water from any nearby fountain, she'll thank you and give you the Merciful Blade, a magic sword that's really sharp and durable. Then, if you come back in a few hours, she's dead and you'll get burned really badly if you try to loot the corpse. As you descend into the lower levels of the Citadel, we're treated with the book's first map. The X marks where several wraith-like followers of someone or something named Hisra stands guard over a magical flail. The flail makes a really loud screeching sound when you swing it around, so it scares away weaker-willed creatures. Those wraiths look like this, by the way, and they're constantly bellowing, creepy incantations that will drive you insane. They're actually immune to most physical attacks, but they're afraid of light and can be harmed with magic. This is a great boss battle here. When you enter the royal antechamber, this whole room is covered in slime and large eggs, and out of the darkness, a mega-sized slug comes popping out, the Yellow Usurper. It shoots hot slime, of course, and every time you wound it, hot secretions come shooting out of the wound. It will actually eat its own eggs to heal itself during battle, and the only way to take it out is to pour salt or water or anything cold down its mouth or into one of its wounds. Once you kill the Yellow Usurper, you notice a magical axe sticking out of its body. This is the Molten Axe, which is not only impervious to high heat, but will itself cut through metal armor due to being superheated. You get a lot of magical weapons in this game, by the way. Anyway, just beyond in the darkness, you see a throne. Oh, okay, here's Hisra. He was once the king of this place, and his headless body holds a musty old grimoire. When you try to read the book, You feel super stressed out and you just get a headache. You can't actually understand anything on the pages. And you spot a crown in the ashes on the throne. When you put that crown on, you get a vision through someone else's eyes, but it's really hazy and you can't make out anything beyond light and shadows. If you leave the Citadel with that grimoire, you're soon greeted by that lady that you saw at the beginning of the game who was riding around on that headless horse. She mistakes you for King Hydra and tells you that she's kept them safe like she promised. She takes off her blindfold and reveals what she's talking about: scarlet eyeballs, which she promptly plucks out of her head and offers to you. If you accept the eyes, then she and her horse collapse into ash and are blown away with the wind. If you decline the eyes, she screams and gallops away, but either way, the mystery of the crown is solved. Anytime you wear that crown, you can see through those scarlet eyes. There's a little caveat here though. If you were wearing the crown while the eyes were still inside that lady's head as she took off the blindfold, then those eyes instantly become yours and you are forever blind unless you're wearing the crown. One cool thing about the eyes though is that if you try to read that grimoire through its eyes, you'll have access to several powerful but unnamed spells. But Hizra's spirit will also try to rip your soul out and possess your body. Okay, you're having another nightmare. The skeleton comes out of the darkness, yelling at you about being the harbinger of ash and you needing to cower. And when you wake up, you realize that your courage has been stolen, but there is some way of getting it back. And one thing you should do is to help the meek in their time of need. But for now, you have gained the faint-hearted condition. Actually, this page reminds me that we had our tongue stolen at the beginning of the game, so we shouldn't have been able to speak this entire time. Just keep that in mind on future playthroughs, I guess. After several days of traveling north and east, you reach a new area called the Shaded Wetlands. It's murky and boggy. There are insects and lowly slime beasts. I really like this concept here. Smoke trees are these really tall evergreens that grow super fast, so fast that they actually destroy towns and villages, and they don't bear fruit, and their wood is weak and worthless. And they cast extremely dark shadows. You can encounter one of these dozen creatures here in the Shaded Wetlands. I do like these creatures, but I have to say, they're largely interchangeable within the 12 packs from the other areas. You're not really getting a ton of location-specific qualities with most of these minor monsters. After walking through the cold swamp for a while, you sense that someone is stalking you. Turns out, it's this knight who half his face and body is monster and half is still human. The only way to get close to him is to light a torch and keep walking away from him, then snuff out the torch and sneak towards him. I don't know how you're supposed to figure that out without the strategy guide, but anyway, if you attack him, any damage to his monster side regenerates instantly, while damage to his human side sticks. If you hurt him a bit, he'll want to flee. If you leave behind some food or other valuable item for him and then come back for some reason to the same spot later on, you'll find a gold coin. You keep going and eventually come upon a small stone hut with a little window near it. Near the hut is a four-faced monolith with cloth and hair tied to it. When you get closer, a guy wearing a helmet appears at the window and is kind of condescending but invites you into his palace for shelter and other pleasures in exchange for a favor of some sort. Turns out this man is a sort of harmless, self-styled cartographer named Usil, and his hut is a mess of old maps, books, notes, and strange brass tools. He shuffles about in his clanky armor, scribbling down notes, and tells you about a nearby labyrinth that he's trying to map out. Eventually, you fall asleep. Staying in the hut for the first day, all you notice is 1, the food sucks, and 2, his maps are all largely the same, but his most recent ones don't seem to make any sense. Day 2 is a lot more interesting. You accompany the cartographer to that labyrinth he was talking about, but he makes you stand outside. He comes out with some stone tablets that you help him carry back to the hut, and he transcribes them for hours. Then he leaves that night but doesn't return. The next morning you wake up with bite marks on your arm, and Usil returns in the evening, sounding distressed, but he seems clearer of mind. On the 4th day, he sleeps all day, and that gives you a chance to look at his most recent maps, which are all just the same symbol written over and over. When he wakes up, he heads straight out to the labyrinth. That very night, you wake up to a sharp pain. You see a figure scurrying off into the darkness and realize that a chunk of your ear has been bitten off. The cartographer is in the darkness, talking all kinds of nonsense while he's chewing on your ear. He actually offers you one of his fingers to eat, and here you have a choice. If you partake, then the rotting corpse that happens to be sitting on his desk across the room, that I forgot to mention, will start to seem really tasty. If you refuse his fingers, the cannibal cartographer will get mad and tell you to leave his hut. If you attack him, he'll just run away cackling. Moving on, you come upon the northernmost part of the wetlands, where you spot a knight whose silver armor is in really good condition and something you could wear for yourself, except that there's this giant, fleshy, floating head called a silent watcher that you'll have to defeat first. Watchers are normally the size of a human head, but they can get really big if they grow in power. This one's huge and will drain you of your hit points just by staring at you. You can blind it temporarily with light, and it's only susceptible to damage by harming its eyes. You come upon a shrine in the middle of the swamp whose base is completely covered in a mass of worms. There's a wild boar feasting on the worms, but naturally the worms have taken over the boar's body, and now the thing is attacking you. If you smite the boar, the worms will come bursting out, and there's a chance you'll get infected with the rotworm infestation. If you don't find a cure, you'll lose more and more control of your body over time. Inside the shrine is an altar. If you open it, a bunch of worms will come rising out of it, but filling a white robe and holding a holy relic in the form of an eye. This rotting saint will judge your strength of character and put you through some unspecified ordeals, which, if you pass, will grant you that eye relic. The relic can see and absolve sin, although I'm not sure how that works in terms of the game's mechanics.
Vermis.
You come upon a crumbling dome building deep in the wetlands, and you can hear a bunch of locusts inside. Here's a new raft of enemies in this area, which is the Singing Palace. Note that evil furniture is a threat, but we don't actually encounter it in the book. Okay, I've been pretty snarky throughout most of this video, but this map is legitimately a great concept for an RPG dungeon map. I don't think I've ever seen a proper circular maze as a dungeon. It's great because it's a tad confounding for players, but not too complex or confusing. You do want your players to eventually find the center or the exit, whatever the case may be. Incidentally, you can find a copy of this map back in that stone hut with the cartographer, so that's a cool bonus for any players who have sticky fingers. You come upon a knight in tarnished silver armor who is cursing and grumbling to himself. When he sees you, he sheepishly asks that you retrieve his armored shoe for him. It's a little mini quest. As you keep going, you hear a high-pitched melody that isn't the locust. Anytime you get close to the sound, the song seems to be coming from another chamber. And all around you, you notice a bunch of strange pots. If you try to break one, it will either sprout legs and run away, or blow a paralyzing dart at you out of a dart gun. And as you continue on, you'll come upon a greasy, deformed creature lying in pottery shards, trying to cover itself up with the shards. You enter a large chamber, and there are hundreds of locusts flying all over the place. So this place has been cursed with locusts since forever, apparently. If you happen to come on a low swarm density day, they're just everywhere and it's merely annoying. On a medium swarm day, you can barely hear anything other than locusts and you can't really concentrate. On a real high density day, you can barely move and the things are crawling into your clothes and your armor. There's a secret door that leads to a shrine of the god Murgo. The altar is covered in wax, and a figure of tied branches form a faceless effigy of the god. In the cavity of the effigy, there's a dried up tongue all tied up with string. If you try to take the tongue or mess with it, the custodian of the shrine will come popping out, and you'll either have to put some of your own flesh onto the altar, or fight the figure that's made of hands and arms here. You get to a room full of tall columns, and the walls and floor are coated with a sticky, translucent ooze. A hunchbacked knight, or suit of armor at least, comes scuttling down one of the pillars, and a lumpy tongue-like appendage comes flitting out of the helmet. Then two antennae pop out from the armor. This creature is pretty clumsy and can't see. The only real danger is its sticky slime, but if you manage to defeat it, you can get its three-headed flail or its helmet, which confers a lot of protection, but is really gross to wear because it's all fleshy on the inside. As you make your way towards the center of the maze, there's a stone statue of a maiden, and hanging around her neck is a key that unlocks the way out for you. Also, you can remove the face of the statue and put it in the family mural, wherever or whatever that is. Once you get to the dead center of the maze, there's a well, and it's screaming with the sound of locusts. You have to descend down the well in order to continue. The Singing Palace is the name of this area, and the map is almost good. It is a bit non-functional though. It's just a bunch of icons and nonsensical spaces that you can't really explore. Everywhere you go, you see this symbol. It's the same one that the cartographer became obsessed with. Some of them on the walls are written with blood, and they seem to attract locusts. You come upon the Pipers of Sigria at some point. These are the guardians of the palace, and they walk around playing silly, pointless music. There's the bandmaster, who you can easily defeat, but who can call upon other enemies in the area. Then there are the flute brutes, who will use the instrument on their head as a club and are a bit tougher to defeat in battle. You enter a dark chamber, at the center of which is a cracked stone sphere with an eye carved into it. All around you are paintings, most of them ruined, but two of which are still intact. One of the current area you're in, and the other painting of a tower. If you point the eye on the stone sphere towards one of these paintings, the silent watchers, those big fleshy floating heads, in that general area in the painting will flock to that location in real life. Anyway, if you break the sphere open, there's a little metal sphere inside that will render you invisible to silent watchers. Always break things open in RPGs. Oh, here's that family mural that was mentioned earlier. It's a stone carving in a wall of 4 figures, all missing their faces. If you can somehow restore all 4 of the stone faces, then a hidden compartment in the fireplace opens up. We ran into one of these faces earlier, but getting all 4 of the faces is a bit of an ordeal. If you manage to get that fireplace compartment open, you're greeted by a preserved human head wrapped in a shed snakeskin. That's your payoff. Somewhere along the way, you'll also run into that knight's missing shoe. If you bother to return it to the knight, he becomes a stalwart companion of yours for a while. Check this out. You get full stats for this guy and everything. Shining Paladin. Out of the darkness will come this giant fat baby man thing that charges through walls and tries to crush you. It's blind, but very sensitive to sound, so you'll have to sneak around and try to trick it into a trap or something. Normal weapons won't penetrate its thick skin. You then encounter another knight. You encounter a lot of knights in this game. This one is all friendly with you and says that he knows the way out of the dungeon. He says the exit is just beyond this next door. So if you agree to work with him in fighting your way out and you walk through that door, he actually will slam it and lock it behind you, and you have to face off against 3 undead skeletons. If you refuse his offer, he basically tries to force you through the door anyway. If you end up fighting the skeletons and survive, you can loot a treasure chest that has a stone mask, one of the ones, in fact, that you need to unlock that fireplace to get to that head. There's also a bunch of gold and a magical crossbow that never misses when you shoot at animals. If you end up fighting that duplicitous knight, he'll fight dirty and beg for his life if you best him. If you end up killing him and looting his body, there's a rough map of the dungeon on his person. You reach a creepy door that is a little bit short, so you have to stoop over to enter it. Inside is a chamber with long black feathers on the ground. It's also preternaturally quiet in this circular chamber. It's suggested that you want to sleep here, so if you do that, you'll wake up feeling something looming over you. The room is wrapped all around you with the body of this huge chimera creature with a woman's face. You're compelled against your will to get up and walk out of the chamber, and once you do, the creature lowers one of its wings from inside and seals the room shut, and then the wing turns to stone. As you descend down the dungeon here, you see all these giant pillars with faces carved into them with open mouths. The mouths are filled with the sound of locusts, and in fact, you see locusts flying in and out of the holes. As you reach the bottom, it's a flooded chamber, and you come upon the biggest mouth of all in one of the pillars. Inside the mouth are narrow stairs that naturally you're going to climb down. Down in a dank chamber, you come upon a woman sitting atop a giant mound of locusts, humming some unbroken prayer, her hands above her head flayed with the flesh hanging at the wrists. You're meant to shoot the lady with an arrow or something, and she'll fall over dead and disintegrate before your very eyes. As a reward for having heard her prayer yourself, you're granted eternal life as long as you become a cannibal. But only your body will last forever. You'll lose your mind in the process, which explains what happened to the cartographer. So basically, it's not even worth becoming a cannibal. You travel for 5 days and come upon a town that is hanging on the edge of a gigantic sinkhole that you can't see the bottom of. The sky is red and it's raining, and the rain is red and smells like metal. Then when the sun goes down, it starts raining so much that the town streets are flooding and flowing into the sinkhole as 1,000 waterfalls, which is actually a pretty cool visual if you can picture it. All you hear is the rain as you walk through the streets, but you feel eyes on you, like every move is being watched. Then a hooded, robed figure slips out from one of the alleyways, wearing a beaked leather mask, and says, "No, it's too late for you," then slips back into the shadows. In the red puddles on the ground, you can see ghostly images of the townsfolk as they once lived, going about their daily lives. But some of the townsfolk in the puddles act suspiciously, and if you follow any of them, they could lead you to several things. One is a shopkeeper who has been hiding his profits from tax collectors. I think presumably this means you can loot his little cash because it's not like he'll be needing it anymore. Another reflection is a thief running from a guard who leads you to a little hideout where she kept all of her equipment. Again, big loot opportunity for you there. And finally, a nobleman hides his jeweled rapier and fine clothes in order to change into a commoner's clothing and meet with a forbidden lover. You enter a dilapidated temple and see a gaunt man wearing a huge, rusty mask clamped onto his face. He's freaking out about being taken back somewhere, then goes on about a red ship, then he unfolds a blanket. He's actually one of those merchants that you find in random places in RPGs. For sale is exactly one of 3 items: a coffin lockpick that will break after one use, some sharp claws from a bird, and a small bent spoon. As you make it back out onto the streets, there are a number of creepy things. The first is a headless woman in a chair with her head in a cage in front of her. Then you notice that a number of streets are blocked with tons of furniture. You can't climb over the piles because they're covered in some kind of oily varnish. Then straw dummies wrapped in sackcloth soaked red. They're posted all over the city and sometimes appear in places where you didn't see one a moment before. As night falls, the rain recedes and the sky is lit by red lightning. The reflections of the townsfolk in all the puddles come rising out of the ground as shadows, and bells across the city begin tolling. You notice candlelight flickering under some of the doors, and if you knock on any of them, you'll get one of 3 unpleasant greetings. A bunch of hunched, twisted creatures come marching out of the nobles' quarters carrying cages, whips, and man-catchers, all in search of stragglers in town. They're trying to capture people without killing them and then return to their part of town before the break of dawn.
Vermis.
There's a massive fortress perched on the edge of the big sinkhole. Bad stuff happens in there, so naturally that's where we're headed, into the House of Red. Here's another spot where the creator Plastiboo sort of leans in and tries to put together something almost functional for an RPG. There's no comprehensive explanation for any of it, but superfans of Vermis could probably flesh out this map into a super dungeon, I'm sure. This collection of enemies in the House of Red is actually more thematic than the other collections. The motif is a house of torture and imprisonment. The hallways are lined with mangled victims, and there's the sound of torture machines and screams coming from distant chambers. There are 4 kinds of carrion feeders in here. Creeping gore looks like a pile of intestines and sort of slithers around. They won't attack you or anything, but they'll screech really loudly if you get close to one. A crim sun is a star-shaped mollusk that avoids light and hides in corners. I guess they don't attack you either. Apparently, the prisoners like to eat them. Wall lickers feed on the moss on the walls. Prisoners eat these too, but only as a last resort because they taste gross. Blood scavengers are the real threat here. They're dog-sized insects that actually feed on carrion and will attack you if they have you outnumbered by a good amount. And it looks like they'll be giving you the bleeding condition as well. So this place is loaded with traps, really devious and evil traps, and you can spot them sometimes if you see a lot of blood on the ground, but we don't know what kind of traps we're dealing with here besides the spiked wall depicted here. There's a voice that can be heard on some nights, of a motherly voice singing a lullaby. Even the guards don't know where it's coming from, but it often lures prisoners into the darkness, never to be seen again. There's a whole rogues gallery of prisoners here. Old Beast Man, who has a beastly face and yellow eyes. Egg Caretaker, who cradles a large, scaly egg. Howling Pricker, who's screaming and thrashing. Filth Flinger, who has a giant head and who will fling filth at you if you get near. Defeated Remains, who I guess is still alive. Well, maybe not. His name has the word remains in it. Abandoned Knight, who is neither dead nor alive. Rat King, who has an endless stream of rats pouring out of his mouth. And Broken Being, who is a man butchered into pieces but remains alive through magical means. No items are obtained from any of these folks. Maybe there's some dialogue. Really, they're just here to shock you. One of the cells contains a more meaningful exchange, though. It's a starved lady with the head of both a lion and a goat, and a snake for a tail. The Chimera speaks to you, saying you should give up on your quest. I actually have no idea what your quest is, but after all that, she invites you to lay in her lap and she sings a lullaby to get you to sleep. Incidentally, she is not the one who sings those lullabies at night that we mentioned earlier. So that means there are at least 2 lullaby singers in this prison. Anyway, if you decide to put your head on that and fall asleep, you wake up after a few hours unharmed. Other denizens of the prison include the prison thralls, who are dim-witted pig folk who carry out the menial tasks of the prison. If you use one of their faces as a mask, you can go sneaking around as one of them. They won't even know the difference. Silk maidens are pretty tough patrol beasts that are always accompanied by a pig person. You can send them running if you uncover their face, and if you defeat one, you'll get a key that unlocks one area of the prison or another. I like iron coffins. These are spiked coffins that actually walk around and capture prisoners, and they're sort of clumsy, so they'll fall over sometimes if the prisoner inside throws them off balance, and that's not good for the prisoner. You can salvage a spiked door from one of these creatures, but the door itself is extremely heavy. And then there's this much bigger version of the iron coffin called the Ceaseless Purger. And it's this big machine that rolls around on a fixed route to collect bodies and dump them into a designated area. Some areas on its route are really narrow, so you do not want to get caught up there at the wrong time. They're sort of an environmental hazard more than anything. Then there are these people who are led around in chains in order to sniff out townsfolk. They're the reason why people in town have to put up straw effigies of themselves to throw off their scent. You can kill these sniffers pretty easily. Okay, tormentors are the main guards of the prison. They wear these big masks and go around torturing and killing. They have really bad eyesight though, so you can trick them into one of the prison's many traps. Then there's this semi-sentient clockwork machine with huge scissors that goes around beheading prisoners. This thing has to be wound up and will slow down towards the end of its winding cycle. If you manage to defeat one, you can use one of its scissor blades as a weapon. At the far end of a chamber, there's a bronze statue on the wall of a flayed man. An inscription says, "Behold the naked soul free of both shackles and flesh, pure at last." There's a coin slot in its chest, and if you put the coin in, it will clank down and come out in the pelvis area, where it is now permanently wet and red. Unfortunately, you can only do this with one coin. Alright, this is pretty demented stuff. You come into a room that has a bunch of circular holes in the floor. You start hearing a gurgling sound and see the tops of swollen human heads come emerging out of the holes. Then out of a small mound in the back of the room, this big muscular body with deformed head comes crawling out. It's a baby tormentor. It can't stand yet, but it crawls towards you with murderous intent. This neonate's head is really gross once you get close to it. Bulbous, dark red growths all over. It's trying to kill you, so you pretty much have to take a swing. Hitting it on its head will defeat it pretty quickly, and then if you're inclined to eat one of the fleshy grapes off of its head, that will drive you into a killing frenzy for a few minutes and kill your sense of taste forever. In the corner of the room are some tormentor weapons and outfits hanging on the wall, and masks made of human skin if you want to get into disguise. There's a little bit here about a lullaby coming from the old chapel in the fortress. It's apparently a heavily guarded area. Once you step inside, it's actually not guarded at all. You see a stone slab with a veiled corpse on top. The body is beheaded with the head kept nearby, and oddly, the body is not decomposed at all. If you just stand there for a few seconds, you'll actually fall asleep and hear the woman's voice. She says some cryptic stuff and that you're forgiven. You get to this big sort of sewer entrance where all the dumped bodies flow into, and you hear a cacophony of whispers in the pipe's entrance. The water you're wading through is all red and gory, by the way, and in the darkness, you face off against the Sanguine Twin, who is your own doppelganger. If you somehow defeat it, you get a magical sword, quote, held together by pure animosity. It causes profuse bleeding to anything that you hit. You come to the mouth of the pipe, where there are hundreds or maybe thousands of corpses spilling out into the sinkhole below. You start climbing down the pile and spy a narrow ledge. Now you're sidling along this ledge in full plate armor, trying to get to this little side entrance. The stones underfoot are crumbling, and as you stare out into the abyss, you hear voices and your mind goes blank.
Vermis.
You're dreaming again. This time, you find yourself in the ruins of a city in the middle of a storm. That same skeleton you've seen before appears. It's more mumbo jumbo out of this guy. Okay, now you've lost your hope, though. You wake up in an empty body with no desires or convictions, just a longing for a forgotten home. So I guess you do have a desire for the home, but you're weak and about to die. That being said, voices in your head tell you to keep going.
Vermis.
You find yourself in a new area called the Pestilent Mines. This is a really stinky place apparently, so stinky that it gave rise to the Cult of Rot. More enemies here, including Dubious Friend. You ever had one of those? It's really dark here, so dark that even flames from your torch seem to tremble, and it's insinuated that you don't even want to cast light on some of the things down here. So there are a few creepy moments that you'll have down in the mines here. Pits of despair are filled with howls of torment, and if you waste a torch by throwing it down into one of these pits, you won't even see the bottom. Walls with hieroglyphs drawn on them, and food and supplies left at the feet of these drawings as offerings. It's suggested that you don't take any of those provisions that have been left behind, and in fact, leave some of your own as offering. And stalking remains, which are these skeletons that follow you around, but when you turn to look, they lie down really fast on the ground and pretend to be normal bones. If you get annoyed by this, you can waste another torch by leaving it next to the bones and then walking backwards away from them until you're really far away, and then turning and running. You come upon a pair of knights who don't really talk. They're actually pretty harmless and will give you some scented oil and glowing spores that you can use to mark your progress through the mines. You hear an old voice imploring you to snuff out your torch or lantern. If you do so, the stargazer reveals himself with a little blue flame in his lantern. He talks about the true stars, which are right here in this cave. Then he snuffs out his own lantern, and you can see a galaxy of little stars twinkling on the cave ceiling, and it's very pretty and peaceful. If you don't first extinguish your light or rekindle it in the presence of the old scholar, then a blinding light will appear and kill the scholar and then attack you. This is sort of a boss fight against a creature of light, and you have to battle it in the dark and without your armor. It doesn't actually say how to harm it though. Then you're in this long dark tunnel where you experience this sort of illusion where there's this emaciated humanoid silhouette at the end. If you put your light out here for whatever reason, the figure will just disappear in the darkness. But if you keep your light going, the thing howls and starts running towards you and becomes this giant that fills the tunnel and then grabs you with a giant hand before suddenly dissolving into black mist. You come upon a rope that leads you further down into the mines. The rope feels slightly warm and like someone is tugging the other end of it. You finally get to the end of your rope, and it looks like it's tied to a petrified skeleton that is perched over a stairway that leads down even deeper. It turns out the rope is tied to the gray pulsing organs inside of the skeleton, and you notice that all of the skull's teeth are missing. Anyway, you were probably holding on to this guy's intestines the whole time and not rope. The stairway beckons you down into the depths. As you continue on, your flame begins to dim. You have a hard time breathing. You feel numb, and eventually you're just sleepwalking in the darkness. And that's when you hear 4 voices. It's those 4 skeletons from the beginning of the game. They're saying that you have lived too many lives and forgotten your place, and that your place is down below, and it's time to relinquish the flesh that you're borrowing. And then, below your feet, you see an open grave with 4 crowned skulls, and it looks like there's a spot for you. A promise, a reunion. 5 brothers through ages forgotten. 5 shadows vanish with the last breath of a flame never to return. And that's the end. You see your body in the darkness. It's over. So as you can see, Vermis is a strategy guide for a ghost of a game. But if you actually want to bring this to your table, you need to know how to translate the vibe first design into something your players can actually roll dice against. Here are some pointers on how to handle it as a GM. 1. Treat it as a point crawl. Don't try to draw a map of these areas. Vermis III is a series of points of interest. Use the book's structure as a point crawl. Each of these little vignettes are your points. Every 2-page spread is a potential encounter or a room in a massive metaphysical dungeon, and use the sensory details to create environmental hazards. 2. The fill in the blanks technique. The ambiguity in the book is sort of a gift, really. As a GM, you should never find yourself explaining the lore. Just ask your players to help you define it. You can offload the creative heavy lifting this way. Ask the players what their characters' superstitions are, or what they've heard in the taverns about a thing they're encountering. By letting the players' own imaginations bridge the gaps between the illustrations and the descriptions, the world becomes a collaborative hallucination that is more engaging than what you might get from spending hours trying to prep beforehand. 3. Which rule set? To capture that 90s PC RPG feel, you want to use a system that is lethal, atmospheric, and focuses on inventory. MÖRK BORG is the obvious choice. The doom of Vermis matches the dying world of MÖRK BORG perfectly. You can easily reskin any of these enemies as MÖRK BORG monsters with minimal effort. Shadow of the Demon Lord is a great option if you want more crunch and tactical combat. It also handles corruption and insanity really well. Knave or Cairn are great if you want the experience where gear matters more than the character's level and you need high lethality. But alright, here are my final thoughts on Vermis 3. Cons: no PDF version. It's a bit of a heartbreaker here that there's no digital version available for those who want to crop these images for VTT or quick reference. You're tethered to the physical object, which is thematic but undeniably less convenient for the modern digital GM. I spent a lot of time scanning my physical copy to make this video, and the scans came out pretty poorly. An official PDF would have been great. Takes a lot of work. If you want to actually play this, you are essentially building a game from scratch using only a handful of cryptic blueprints. It's just going to require a relatively high amount of effort to convert this book into a functional campaign. My copy had a weird smell. I don't know if it's the specific ink or the way it was stored, but my physical copy arrived with a distinct chemical funk. Pros: very powerful ghost nostalgia. Plastiboo has perfected the art of capturing the phantom memory of games we never actually played. He just taps into that specific eerie feeling of being a kid in the 90s staring at those pixelated screens for too many hours. Relentlessly creative and focused. Unlike many art books that wander, Vermis 3 stays focused on its specific brand of esophageal lo-fi nightmare fuel. Every page feels like it belongs to the same cursed universe, and the commitment to that vision is pretty remarkable. Inspiring for GMs and storytellers. Even if you never run a Vermis campaign, this book is a goldmine of ideas for your own world. There's bound to be something in here that sparks your imagination, and hopefully gives you enough fuel to creep your players out. That's all I have for now. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Vermis 3 and really the whole series so far. Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more RPG reviews, and join the channel as a member for exclusive videos and content. Links for where you can find Vermis are below, and I'll see you in the next one.